Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Developments overnight as to the potential identity of OpTic's fourth player on the roster, with rumours emerging that despite the fact that Envoy's told Toronto that he wants to join them, no contract has yet been locked in. This means that given the fact that OpTic and Envoy had conversations early in this transfer window, they could potentially try and do to Toronto what FaZe have just done to OpTic. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Starting with the Boston Breach, they put this out last night with a couple of players. I'm pretty sure one of these guys might be like a Rainbow Six player. I saw that going around, and you know, one of these guys might be Snoopy. Difficult to say, might not be, might be completely irrelevant, but we do believe that Snoopy's going to be on the roster. We saw that yesterday, that there's rumors that they've signed him and re-signed him, and the team of four was meant to be Slasher, Ghosty, Snoopy, Envoy. We heard that a couple of days ago now, and apparently, based on what I, over the last 24 hours, that the team of three is still potentially going to be in place there. That Slasher, Ghosty plus Snoopy is still a very likely team of three right now in Boston, which I think is pretty good going, to be honest. Slasher has a history of not always playing it with the younger rookie players. It has happened, but usually he prefers someone with a bit more experience. So I do wonder if that's your team of three, Ghosty, Snoopy, Slasher, what fourth would they want? I don't think that Slasher would really want another, because Snoopy's going to require a lot of work to get him to where he can be in terms of the talent that this guy has. They might want another player that's a little bit more like veteran experience to some degree, someone with a few more years under their belt, but they need, an SMG in that role, because Snoopy's somewhat similar to Shotzzy in some respects. There's a few SMGs that come to mind. I know many people have been looking at challenges and saying, well, what about a guy like Pentagram? And Doug even says that he's the most underrated player that he's ever seen. And Pentagram's been around a few years. He was Thieves' substitute, in fairness, a couple of years ago, so maybe that's an option there. But it's tricky, right? Because if you're Boston, you're looking at the SMGs available, and you're thinking, well, there really aren't too many now that Envoy is going to join Toronto, it seems, or potentially another option. We'll get into that. But after Envoy said, no, I'm going to join Toronto, turn down this offer, you're like, well, a lot of the top SMGs are getting locked up here. It's kind of difficult to find a good candidate to partner Snoopy in that respect, but I still like this Slasher Ghosty thing, actually, from an AR perspective, if they do that on the Boston roster for next season. This I thought was pretty funny from Thieves as well, right? Here comes Drazah trying to get into the facility, and it locks him out, and he basically says, look, my contract isn't up yet, guys. You've still got to let me in for now. So technically, I mean, I'm guessing his contract probably is up by now. I don't know. You'd have thought it would be, right? Because the season is over. His contract for the season should be done. I mean, it's not lasting into the 2023-2024 season, which we are technically now in. So, I'd think that he would be a free agent, but still, they're doing some content with Drazah. Could you imagine the world in which Drazah turns around and comes back to Thieves? I still don't know what Thieves are doing, man. There's been a few names that have been associated with that camp over the last couple of days, but it's so difficult to say. They're getting all their players poached. Even last night we talked about maybe Kenny goes to OpTic, right? I think it's doubtful for sure, but it is at least a possibility. And Thieves might need a complete squad rebuild from the ground up, which is far from ideal. Did want to mention, actually, the players that have made a grand finals in all 4 years of the CDL. So some usual suspects here: Simp, aBeZy, Cellium, Shotzzy's up here. Then you've got Huke as well, of course. He managed to somehow do it last year on Los Angeles Guerrillas. CleanX has actually won an event every single year. This includes the Kickoff Classics as well. And even this season, Mack extended his streak. So some names that you mightn't expect on here, but still impressive stuff. And CleanX is the guy over the 4 years to have won something in the Toronto Ultra Camp every single year. And it was surprising, right, that CleanX, after being such an integral part of Toronto for their entire span in the CDL, and really the only guy that's been around, apart from, I guess, the OpTic situation, but even then you've got, Dashy was messed around a bit, the OGLA stuff, everything going on there. Scump's now retired. Pretty much the only player, right, who's been on the same organization the entire time. Even Kenny was not on Los Angeles Thieves the entire time, because they only came in year 2 after OGLA year 1. So surprising that they were potentially looking to move CleanX on or sell him elsewhere, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And if that isn't the case, then Envoy will be very interested, of course, in that spot, as is by far the most likely possibility as it stands, but not yet guaranteed. OpTic still need a flex. These were the numbers for Ghosty online only last season. 13 in 2 online record. Very impressive stuff. Search and Destroy, very good. Hardpoint, Hill time was really where things were going off for Ghosty, right? Like, I mean, his slaying wasn't spectacular, but it obviously didn't need to be with the other guys he had on his roster. roster. Huke was very good online as well, but it's this hill time number, right? 99 in that category, 98 seconds in the hill per 10 minutes of gameplay, and Octane's like, it's honest work. 98 is crazy, says Drazah in the replies. Octane would be proud. So interesting conversations between these guys. But I think it's pretty clear at this point, Ghosty's not coming back into the starting team, which leaves other options. Now, there was this from Ronnie last night. There was this funny thread on Reddit. You know how these guys operate, talking about how, well, usually Simp sits on the far left and Pred sits on the far right when they play, and Dashy and Shotzzy sit usually in between them. So already they're getting their perfect, comfortable seat positions equals maximum flow state with the least amount of distractions, which means the ideal environment to win. But Ronnie actually says in the replies here from CDL Scumintel that there might have been a little bit of a breakthrough last night in terms of the new fourth man, but it's not quite enough to tweet about yet. I wanted to share a couple of things for you guys. Firstly, a quick clip from Hitch here from the OpTic podcast yesterday, where he kind of implies they have a good idea as to their entire team and even their fifth man. Now, I don't know if there's really anything to say too much about this, it might just be joking around to some degree, but I do wonder, what OpTic's fifth man's going to be this season, or who it's going to be, because in previous years, obviously last year was a mess, right? I mean, it was Scump technically, and then iLLeY was still around, and then Zinni came along, so they could kind of get away with that, but then technically JP Krez, their analyst, was the sub at the end of the season, which is a little bit risky when you don't have an actual, professional player as your substitutes. So I wonder what OpTic will do, because in the past they've had various things on this, even back in the day when, they had Embos, right, in the Chicago Huntsman days, was their substitute. I think he was around there, right? So maybe they'll do a similar thing next year and they'll get Scump to put his name down or something again. But if they don't, they might actually need to look at an option there. Maybe they've got some ideas in mind, but usually this is something that's decided way down the line.
Nope.
All right.
Cool.
Well,
cool.
We had it. We have all 5 players locked in, right?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
They're bringing me back. They said the big dog's back. I said, all right, I'll strap up. Tony's coming through. They'd fucking riot. They'd storm this building. If there was an OpTic tweet that says Methods is returning to our team, there would be
the amount of friendship org replies to that.
Brother.
I mean, imagine they get mad about who's the sub. We didn't even have a sub last year. Do people have subs still?
JP Krez was our sub last year.
Hell yeah.
Can you imagine? Worst comes to worst.
He has
Krez
to
is
spawn
spawning
just
in.
getting tucked.
Dude, but
whoa.
For the fans, it would be like the Mark TV game.
I like this. This is outside the box, but we're going to go right off the riff. I like Envoy. Now, here's the thing with Envoy. It seems like he's committed to Toronto, but I don't know, and I don't think he's signed a new deal yet. So I think there's an option to 11th hour steal Envoy if you want to go down that route. He's obviously been on OpTic before. I think he can run a flex really, really well. I think he can run an AR really well. So I like that as sort of an outside the box thing, but he might be sort of impossible to get based on the fact that he's committed to Toronto. I think Kenny's an interesting one. We did a podcast with Ken yesterday, and he said he's open to running an AR. Now we're getting some interesting options. Donnie Temp, OpTic Don. Man, that would be insane, right? I have talked to some of his former players, or rather former teammates recently, and they've been gassing up the strides that Donnie's taken this year as a teammate, kind of really accepting how to play the right style of Call of Duty. I just don't know if OpTic's going to go down that route, but man, the content with Don, I just feel like it'd be a very interesting decision. I just feel like if Dante's out there, though, you probably still take him over Temp. But
Ben did bring up a couple of ideas that I hadn't really thought about before. Of course, we saw him at the end talking about Donnie. Temp, who is definitely an option. A very doubtful option to me, but still it's not out of the realms of possibility. Formal was another one I didn't share the clip of, but he did mention it at the end of the video that he was like, well, with OpTic Halo struggling, would Formal want to make a return? I don't think that will happen unless Formal actually thinks the game's going to be good. If he can play the game up front and he thinks it's going to be good and Formal can get his passion back, sure. And that would be a crazy timeline with Dashy and Formal reuniting in some respects. I'm not sure that AR combo worked that well, to be honest, back in the day in Cold War. There were obviously some benefits and Formal was pretty much on his way out the door at that point. So I think that's probably why it fell short of where it could be. But I still like Dashy as a main, so I don't think that's going to happen. But the other player that he mentions is Envoy, and I think honestly that's the interesting option right now because Of all the flex options, I think Sib is probably the way to go. Okay, we talked about Kenny. There's a couple of other options, but possibly you get a player that isn't a flex to do that role instead. We know that a couple of weeks ago now, Envoy and OpTic had some discussions, some preliminary talks, right? It was meant to be Envoy and Drazah at the time. That story has very much changed since then. But yeah, Envoy and OpTic had some talks, and it makes sense. Envoy was there at the organization before. I'm sure in some respects he would like to return and to play with Dashy again, and, you know, to see if they can have a better time than they did back in the Cold War days might be very viable. But now Envoy gets the offer from Boston. He turns that down. He decides, you know what, Toronto, they've given me a great opportunity if that team of Scrappy, CleanX, Insight stays around. But still, if the contract had been signed there, Ben reckons it hasn't been signed yet. And if it hadn't been, we'd have probably seen something, right? Usually the players, they tweet out, you know, graphic of them signing. You know how it goes, the contract signing thing. I'm sure we'll have plenty of them over the next couple of weeks. If you guys forgot what it looked like, we're going to see plenty of them on the channel. We haven't seen that yet, right? From any party involved. Even FaZe, they say, oh, it's official with the little, you know, signing the thing with the pen when they supposedly locked in Drazah the other day. So, yeah, that's what it looks like, right? That OpTic, okay, Pred hasn't tweeted it either, but we got CDL Scum Intel tweeting it out with him having presumably signed the contract. So, a few things have been done, but it seems like Ultra Envoy hasn't been locked in yet. Maybe it's terms, maybe it's salary, I don't know, but there's a few things that mean that hasn't been necessarily guaranteed. So if OpTic come along and say, hey Envoy, do you actually want to come and run the flex for us? I think it would be Envoy running that flex second AR, potentially third SMG, which could be very good actually. If that was to be the case, I would prefer to have Pred and Shotzzy still on the SMGs. I think that's the best way to do it. And I think Envoy can definitely run a flex well in that role if necessary. They've got some experience together in the past, and I think it's definitely an option that if you're OpTic, you will want to have a look at, because, you know, just because there's flex options out there, second AR options, doesn't mean that other players couldn't step into those roles if necessary, and I feel like Envoy would be a great option there. However, will they be able to do it? Will Toronto have locked it in by this time? Will OpTic want to do, you know, a little bit of trickery like that? But then again, it's kind of happened to them with Drazah over the last couple of days. Seemed like OpTic were confident they were going to get Drazah. That seemed that it was, you know, 70-75% done. Then FaZe come in and say, hey, we can't get Scrappy. Drazah, do you want to come and join us instead? We apologize for all the things we said a few months ago. And Drazah's like, yeah, you know what, that sounds like a good plan. Let me go to FaZe instead. And from under OpTic's noses, probably they had some contract ideas getting ready to go. He then goes away to FaZe and they're struggling for an option. So, you know, these are the things in this Rostermania period. Unless someone's locked in and signs, you can never be sure. An Envoy might, you know, if potentially Dashy's DMing Envoy again and be like, hey, you know, do you want to have a think about this? Then he might be saying, well, I like the Toronto offer, but you guys might have to give me a bit more money if you want me to come back type thing. So this could still drag on for sure. Sib seems still the most likely candidate on what we saw yesterday, and just in that role, it probably makes more sense. Of course, bringing Envoy in would be a risk. It's not like Dashy and Envoy had the greatest success together, right, when they played a couple of years ago in Cold War. Different players, evolved players nowadays, probably better versions of themselves as players than they were individually back then, to be honest, but still, definitely some questions there to be answered in the comments below. We'll also mention that aBeZy was actually playing an S&D channel last night with Arcitys and Drazah, so, you know, read into that what you will. And just to look at a couple of stat cards here, so we saw the Ghosty one. These are Dashy's numbers on the season. Online, especially the Search and Destroy was very good, and this is the thing getting Sib, that you probably don't get the Search and Destroy with Sib that you necessarily get from Drazah. I mean, I think Drazah last year, LAN at Search and Destroy had a 1.22, Sib had a 1.05, I think. So Drazah's ridiculous at Surge. But then again, when you've got Dashy, you've got Shotzzy, and you've got Pred, absolute Search and Destroy demons. Okay, Shotzzy maybe not so much this year, but typically that's been the case. Do you need Sib to be like dropping 1.2s in Search? Possibly not, but then again, you look over at FaZe and you think, well, their Search is going to be disgusting still, and that's an important game mode, and their respawn probably should be better with the better pace that they should have if they were to bring Drazah into the roster. And these are Envoy's numbers just out of interest here, of course, on the SMG, but I feel like his playstyle could adapt quite well to a flex if needed. It would be a risk though, and it's maybe a risk that's not worth taking if you're OpTic, and there are other good options on the market in that flex position. So very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.